morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Calderon.
I am Gail Villarnino.
I am Shailene Falercona.
And you are watching News Tonight. This evening, we will be talking the hot issue on the conflict on West Philippine Sea. Gail Villarmino reporting.
More Chinese maritime militia ships return to West Philippine Sea. In Manila, Philippines, a government task force watching over the country's western waters reported on Wednesday that Chinese maritime militia vessels were back inside the West Philippine Sea and the country's 370-kilometer exclusive economic zone. This time, there was more of them. The National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea also reported to the Philippine Coast Guard and the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources again dropped away Chinese ships from the Escoda Sabina Shoal of Palawan Province. National Security Advisor Hermogen Esperon Jr., chair of the NTF-WPS, said a maritime patrol recorded on May 9 the presence of at least 287 CMM vessels scattered over various maritime features covered by Palawan's Kalayaan municipality and the other parts of the country's EEZ. These were more than 220 CMM vessels that have swarmed the Julian Telepe Whitson Reef in March and then later dispersed to other parts of the West Philippine Sea. The presence of the Chinese vessels then had triggered several diplomatic protests against Chinese incursions into Philippine waters. According to Esperon, the Chinese vessels included a CMM ship close to Philippine Health Lawak, Nanshan Island, 11-year Rector Reed Bank, and 1 CMM ship and a Chinese Coast Guard ship of the Philippine Health Ayugin 2nd Thomas Shoal. There also were 14 CMM vessels and a CCG ship near Pag-asa. The biggest island occupied by Filipinos is the Kalayaan Island Group. 2 CMM vessels of Panata Island, Langkian Kai, and 34 CMM ships at Julian Telepe, which is part of the Pagkakaisa Union Bank's Filipino Foods. The task force also reported an average of 4 CCG vessels daily at Baho de Mansilo, Scarborough Shoal, also called Panatag Shoal, from May 3 to May 10. The task force also reported an average of 4 CCG vessels daily at Baho de Mansilo, Scarborough Shoal, also called Panatag Shoal, from May 3 to May 10. An average of 10 Filipino fishing boats have also been seen inside the lagoon from May 7 to May 9. The NTF-WPS has encouraged Filipinos to fish in the area and ignore the Chinese fishing ban. The PCG and BFAR dropped 3 CMM ships away from Sabina on May 7 and 8, as they had done on April 27 and 29. Without mentioning Harry Roque by name, Esperon debunked the presidential spokesperson claims earlier this week that Juan Telepe was located beyond the Philippine EEZ, saying it was 324 kilometers from Badarasa, Palawan. On Tuesday night, Foreign Secretary Theodore Locsin Jr. declared on Twitter, "There's only some voice on what's ours, mine, period. That even the military has any say. I speak for the President on this subject." Pangilinan said only China will be amused by the disagreement in the Duterte cabinet on the handling of the sea dispute. Former Foreign Secretary Albert Del Rosario said it was unwise to debate on the West Philippine Sea at this time. Roque challenged Del Rosario and Vice President Leni Robredo to debate with him after President Rodrigo Duterte backed out of a debate with retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, but Del Rosario rejected it, saying it was not the best way to spend our time. Senate President Vicente Soto III said will only listen to Locsin on this matter. Senator Aquilino Pimentel III, chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, suggested that the entire executive department follow a DFA script on the dispute with China. The Philippines and the West Philippine Sea. Manila claims only part of the South China Sea, but the area it does not claim is a core national interest. Contrary to the thinking in certain quarters, the Philippines does not lay claim to the entire South China Sea, but rather to the smaller area of the SES of the country's western seaboard that is well within its exclusive economic zone and continental shelf is known of the West Philippine Sea. The Philippine government spelled out this difference when President Benigno Aquino Jr. issued Administrative Order 29 on September 5, 2012, which remained the maritime areas to the country's west. The Philippines is an archipelagic maritime state, which makes the WPS a matter of serious national importance, given its strategic location, security implications, and resources. The WPS is the source of most of the country's indigenous oil and gas, with the potential to meet the country's fuel demand in the next 20 years, while also hosting a wide array of seabed minerals. While other SCS claimants like China, for instance, can boost onshore and offshore producing basins outside the SCS, the Philippines' present oil and gas productions are clustered around offshore Northwest Palawan and the Rector-Reed Bank in the WPS. Seismic studies suggest that these two areas possess the greatest potential for a country long depending on oil imports. As the Philippines continues to develop its offshore hydrocarbons exploration and development capabilities while attracting local and foreign investors in harnessing these resources, the WPS promises to figure in the country's quest for future energy security and self-sufficiency. This may help to explain why the Relateral Joint Marine Seismic Undertaking 2005-2008 was publicly criticized after news emerged that the coverage area includes 75 to 80% of the Philippine Western EEZ, including the gas-rich Ricto Bank. The notion of sharing scarce finite resources with other states led many to reject the proposed continuation of the deal. It was also said that JMSU gave China a window to claim previously undisputed maritime areas, such as Recto Bank and other waters very close to Palawan. The WPS also lies along major Philippine trading channels, and control of these waters by an unfriendly state could triple the country's improving economy, due to this concern at the close proximity of many foreign-occupied features. Local fishermen visiting certain parts of the WPS have also been harassed and chased away by armed troops and paramilitary chiefs at other occupants. The need to develop the country's naval and maritime law enforcement assets is thus essential, both to protect local fishermen and to conserve the fisheries resources of the WPS for future Filipino generations. The Philippines is also advocating a rules-based approach that calls for the delineation of areas under dispute from those that are undisputed to facilitate talks of functional cooperation or joint development in disputed areas. This position had been communicated at regional meetings and summits on the SCS issue. The recent feeling of a legal challenge against China's claims in the WPS can also be understood as resorting to international law to encourage a rival claimant to clarify the extent, nature, and basis of its claims. China Palarcona reporting.
Fishing in troubled waters defense. In July 2016, the verdict which went in favor of the Philippines in the case it brought in the Permanent Court of Arbitration, or PCA, against China's claims in the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea created big waves in these disputed waters. The changing tide in the conflict has not come about through the increased weight of international law as increased as it anticipated. It has been swelled due to the unexpected diplomatic sail towards China by the new captain of the ship named Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte. The United States in toward China Sea seems to have a pragmatic move in the interest of economic concessions and security considerations, and it did indeed calm tensions in the West Philippine Sea for a short while. Then in June 2019, as the Philippines was about to commemorate its historic win in PCA, a Chinese vessel ran over and sunk an anchored Filipino fishing boat near Recto Bank within the Philippines Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. After the incident, the Chinese vessel left the scene without rendering assistance to the 22 Filipino crew members in the sea. A year before, in June 2018, destructive illegal fishing and poaching activities by Chinese nationals in Scarborough Shoal had been reported by the Filipino fishing community as posing a grave threat to its economic security and the country's marine resources. Against the backdrop of unresolved issues concerning China in the West Philippine Sea, top Philippine officials from the Departments of Defense and Foreign Affairs have criticized Chinese behavior in regard to the Recto Bank incident as a deliberate maneuver which displayed an utter disregard for the safety of the life at sea. Domestic political activists condemned the harassment and also censored Duterte's inaction on the sinking of a Filipino boat in Philippine waters. Despite the diplomatic protest of his Foreign Affairs Secretary and pressure from the opposition, the President was unperturbed about his stance on the West Philippine Sea. He downplayed the maritime incident and dismissed the call to arms to protect and defend the Philippines' sovereign rights in the contested sea. Instead, he talked about staying out of trouble with China and getting real about the country's military capability. Duterte's rhetoric may have blown his armed forces out of the water, but the stark realism of his reasoning brings to the surface the relation between defense capacity and foreign policy. The popular demand for a strong stance in this maritime dispute is driven by national pride, constitutional principles, security interests, and international law. However, these arguments fail to include the critical measure of a country's strategic position, and for Duterte, the Philippines' defense stance is a realistic determinant of his soft stand in the sea row. In light of this, I believe that we can product an insightful policy debate by asking the following questions. How does the Philippines' defense posture serve as an explanatory factor for Duterte's soft policy stance vis-a-vis China in the West Philippine Sea dispute? How can the application of offensive defense during the study of national and international security explain Duterte's preferences for avoiding conflict with China following the Recto Bank incident of June 2019? How can this structural, realist theory of security illuminate key areas of concern in regard to Philippine key areas, defense, and foreign policy? Duterte's policies, position, and defense posture. At the height of media outrage over the Chinese vessels ramming a Filipino recto near Recto Bank on a June 9, 2019, President Rodrigo Duterte's reticence sent a clear and consistent message. The Philippines is not ready to confront China. Duterte held back from his usual fiery oratory while his defense and military officials raised the alarm over what they assessed as unintentional and therefore condemnable act by the Chinese in the territorial waters of the Philippines. When he finally broke his silence of the quell this squabble, the President, in his role as Commander-in-Chief, addressed the Philippine Navy's anniversary celebration on June 17, 2019, with a warning against sowing tension with China over a maritime incident. He encouraged the Navy to stay out of trouble, saying they simply cannot afford to go to war with China. In his State of the Nation address on July 22, 2019, the President talked about the delicate balancing act needed to avoid armed conflict in the West Philippine Sea and to protect the country's territorial waters and natural resources at the same time. He lamented that the Philippines had lost effective occupation of Scarborough Shoal when its Navy retreated in a standoff with China long before his presidency. Kim reporting.
Zambales lawyers urge Duterte to retract statements on West Philippine Sea. San Antonio, Zambales, Philippines, a group of lawyers in this province facing the West Philippine Sea, on Monday, May 17, urged President Rodrigo Duterte to publicly uphold the Constitution by retracting his defeatist statements on China's illegal activities in the West Philippine Sea. In a statement of concern, the Integrated Bar of the Philippines Zambales chapter specifically called on Duterte to retract his public statement that China is in possession of the West Philippine Sea. The lawyers group referred to the president's recent remark that the arbitral award is a mere scrap of paper and should be thrown in the wastebasket. It said such a statement could be interpreted as an admission that the government is no longer interested in the disputed territories. They cited Article 7, Section 2 of the Philippines Constitution that says the state shall protect the nation's marine wealth in its archipelagic waters, territorial sea, and exclusive economic zone, and reserve its use and enjoyment inclusively to Filipino citizens. When a part of our country's territory is taken against our will by the People's Republic of China, and our countrymen, particularly the fishermen, are threatened with force from exclusive enjoying our nation's marine resources, the President is solemnly bound to uphold, defend, and protect his countrymen and the integrity of our nation's territory, the lawyers said. The statement was signed by incumbent officers of the IBP Zambales chapter, led by its president, Attorney Winston Mayo Hinez, and former IBP Zambales chapter presidents, Attorney Dio Amor David, Attorney Josepina Bueno, and Attorney Jacqueline Hannah P. De Villa. Also signatories were Senior Zambales Provincial Board members Renato Colado and Sam Ablola, and Olongapo City Councilor Ariela M. Bundang Ortiz. They said Zambales fisherfolk are being directly affected by China's occupation of the Scarborough Shoal, also known as Bajo de Masinloc or Panatag's Shoal, some 220 kilometers off the province coast. Local fishermen recently told the Inquirer that they have been losing about 60% of their usual catch due to the presence of Chinese vessels in Scarborough Shoal and elsewhere within the country's exclusive economic zone. On May 10, retired Supreme Court Justice Antonio Carpio said Filipino fishermen could no longer get galunggong, round scad, from their traditional fishing ground. We are importing galunggong from China. That galunggong come from the West Philippine Sea, being caught by Chinese fishermen from the Philippine Sea and told to us. They sell our own fish, Carpio said in a radio interview. The fish in the exclusive economic zone under the Constitution is exclusively for Filipino citizens. The president said he has an agreement with President Xi Jinping of China. They can fish in the West Philippine Sea. The Chinese have the largest fishing fleet in the world, about 200,000 fishing vessels. Our fishermen are complaining that they are no longer catch any fish, Carpio said. Last month, the government organization Agham Advocates of Science and Technology for the People condemned China's incursion in the West Philippine Sea. The presence of around 220 Chinese fishing vessels, believed to be Chinese militia in the Julian Filipe Reef, and other parts of the West Philippine Sea, as well as the presence of illegal structures in Union Bank in the Kalayaan group of islands are clear violations of our national sovereignty, it said in a statement. Agham warned of possible consequences not only to the environment, but also to the fisheries production and fisherfolk welfare. Chinese rising aggression in the past 5 years of the Duterte administration involved many cases of harassment and extortion on Filipino fisherfolk, as well as environmental destruction, including poaching of giant clams and reclamation and building of military bases on reef areas, it said. One mission, one community, one assailant. This is the news tonight.